media can actually contribute to a society. In these days, globalization and multimedia proliferation, journalism should help the publics they serve, whether they're small neighbourhoods or cross-national communities. The journalism should really take into account a lot more of what the community responds to, what the community wants. So, very much journalism these days, the media is far too close to the seats of power and needs to relocate closer to the communities themselves. So she argues for reform of deliberative journalism that promotes empowering local people and greater popular decision making. And this approach is very challenging for journalists because but it is actually ideally suited for reporting on environmental and climate change. So it's a model for journalism for climate reporting. And these sort of approaches are actually flagged in the new book that came out last year, the Rethinking Journalism, Peters and Broadsma, and what the profession needs to regain public trust and to confront the global crisis in journalism by discovering a place in democracy. In some respects, the media has lost its role from its actual role in democracy. So according to one of the authors, Barnhorst, journalists need to engage with and question the journalism crisis and rethink the trust relations with the media. A deliberative journalist needs to file issue-based reports that are sufficiently engaging to capture public attention. But they also need to be incisive, comprehensive and balanced, so that the public can frame issues and understand the background and context of these issues. And journalists also need to flag the insights and evaluate possible responses or potential solutions, so particularly in the environmental context. Now, I'm just going to finish off now. This is a southbound publisher based in Singapore, Chim Sak Yung, who actually gives public lectures and runs courses for journalists in environmental issues. And he came up with a scenario in the AMIC conference last year. And he was saying that the public perception, well rather the perception that journalists have. So if we're looking at say 2052 climate change, this is what's apparent. It's by then be a degraded environment. There'll be major reductions in affordable water supplies, challenges in food production, new pandemics, conflict over declining resources. But by and large, the media industry just carries on much the same and responds to these challenges in the same way that it is at the moment. What he argues for is a fundamental radical change of the media in the way it actually sort of interacts with its society and how it actually does things. And so he's saying it's not a mission impossible, but the media has to undo past messages and the impact of those messages that promote less consumption. Work on very long time scales because political policies are very short time spans based on election periods of 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever it is. And the media often thinks in those terms as well. And so what he's arguing for is that the journalists, the media itself, have to think a lot more strategically, longer term. And altruism for future generations and advocate against old vested interests. Has anybody been watching The Seven Sisters on Al Jazeera? Brilliant, absolutely superb television. It's devastating about the global realities of and how the oil companies essentially run the planet. Anyway, that's so the point. So just finishing off. Thanks very much.
The beginning of early stages of my research, I argue that climate change awareness campaign should also focus on empowering people, nations. There is danger. We all know that there is danger, but we have two choices: do something or do nothing. So in this case, I think that there is always a solution to any problem. But speaking on the media's role in the Pacific, it's very hard to encourage the media to be part of finding solutions, because that is not their role since after they gained independence. That's belonged to those in governments, finding solutions for the people. And the media's role is like just mediating, just between the government and the people, just only to spreading news. But when it comes now to climate change deliberations, there is a problem, because everyone, especially the media, asks questions, what are we doing? Since 2009, we all know that the Copenhagen meeting failed to adopt any agreement. When that meeting failed to come up with agreement, we can see that a lot of the focus of the coverage on the small island nations is growing and focusing on disappearing nations. We can watch we watch documentaries, and we read stories and articles, and they keep saying like disappearing nations. But as I said, nothing wrong with the word disappearing nations. But during these years, now it comes down to the issue of adaptation and mitigation in the West or developed countries. So when you have told people that their country would disappear, and the next day you come back to work with them to adapt, I think that is a problem there. So I find out in my research that people start to stop thinking about that they're going to disappear. Because as humans, we don't want to hear that someone come and tell us that we would die next year. The same thing, because climate change is like the end of the world to them. So the campaign there's something wrong with the campaign at the beginning, with the use of the word disappearing. So there is a chance now that there is a shift now from disappearing to adaptation. And what I found in the literature that I have researched in Tuvalu, Kiribati, and Marshall Islands, and the Federated State of Micronesia, they now focus on adaptation, and they all come down to people participation. So we start to move away from disappearing nations. This is the case in the Pacific Island nations. They move away from disappearing nations. They now focus on how they can work with the people, adaptation, and how they can get funding from developed or industrialized countries. Disappearing nations and disempowering nations doesn't really help adaptation, because it doesn't make sense to those on the ground. They know that there is danger, there is a problem, but they really want to find what is the problem, what is the answer, why this happened. But when we keep telling them that their country will submerge, or in 10 or 20 or 50 years, it will go underwater. Now, the problem with several countries in the Pacific, they don't actually have the real figure or the real date, the year that they would disappear. And they don't have any connections with their policy, what they said around the world that they are going to submerge, and now they're going to work towards that goal of maintaining and migrating their people. You can't really find in their development policy or strategic plans, you can't find how they're going to work towards this, especially in the area of communication. So I find in my research that communication is very important. And given them speaking on the media, in the Pacific, they're very small. One country can have only one radio station. Tuvalu doesn't have any newspaper. In Kiribati, they have 4 newspapers or weekly papers. They have 2 radios. In the Federated State of Micronesia, they have 1 newspaper. They have 4 radio stations, or 3, 1 TV. Very small. So the issue of how can we communicate when people are relying on the radio as their source of information, I think the role of communication is very critical.